Hit record.
5, 4, 3.
Welcome to the Noel Casler podcast, episode 13. Thanks for coming back, folks. We look forward to entertaining you for the next hour as we run down the week's events. I'm back here with my favorite sports fan, mighty Jimmy Kennedy, to wrap up the week's events. And we're looking towards a Memorial Day weekend. So hopefully, everybody had a good weekend when you hear this on Monday morning. And hopefully you let the insanity of the last week and the last year wash off you for a couple of days, and you got to maybe connect with some friends and family. Jimmy, what are you up to, buddy?
Well, I mentioned it last week, but this weekend, the Indianapolis 500 is taking place. Unfortunately, yesterday, I went to my great aunt Mary's funeral. First time I got to see a lot of my family since COVID because of all the restrictions. So it was an unfortunate event to actually see everyone, but we also got a little bit of closure when it came to my great aunt Mary. She was a phenomenal person. And it's one of the drawbacks of coming from a big Irish family. The more family you have, the more funerals you're going to attend. But, we're a unit, and it was good to see everybody.
Right on, man. Well, I'm sorry for your loss. I come from an Irish Catholic family myself, so I get it. And, it's a blessing that you got to meet in person. I lost 12 friends over the last year, and I went to way too many Zoom funerals, and hopefully I don't have to go to any more Zoom funerals, because it's something, hitting end meeting or something just feels especially, harsh when you can't give people a hug when they're grieving. So I'm sorry for your loss, but
thank you, brother.
If she's a great aunt, it sounds like she had a great life. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've had multiple generations in my family for a long time. And just being there and thinking about the last year, it's like, think how many graduations were missed. Like so many American traditions were just taken away. And you can't go back in time and get them. That's the unfortunate thing with COVID. That's kind of irreplaceable.
Well, yeah, and it's not just COVID, it was Trumpism. Trump took away, his mismanagement of it. We lost a year of American life, of American progress, of cultural progress. How many plays didn't come out? How many movies didn't get made? How many, books weren't published? How many people gave up? How many people fell into circumstances as young people in their families that they now can't go pursue that career in the arts? Because daddy lost his job a year ago and they had struggled to put food on the table, and the government was basically against them the whole time, or now they're in one of the 23 states where the GOP governors are turning down the extra federal $300 a week unemployment. That's insane. Nobody's doing well after this last year except for billionaires. Billionaires made a fortune, Jeff Bezos made a lot of money last year, and now he's getting $10 billion from the government so he can build a rocket and compete with Elon Musk, But the poor man, or the middle class man, or the working collar, class man, whatever you want to label them, there's families that have been struggling for too long. And back to your point, like, we lost more than a year's time in shutdown. We lost lives, which are irreplaceable, and that's the ultimate sacrifice. There's nothing more valuable that was taken from this planet than almost 600,000 souls that didn't have to perish. Those people didn't die in those numbers in New Zealand. They've been back at life for a long time. They didn't lose progress as a nation. We not only lost progress, because of Trump and living under a madman, we now have a party that is so emboldened and so empowered in that way of life, they're not even going to let us look at all the bad stuff that happened. We found out officially 18 minutes ago, we taped this on Friday, that the Republicans were successful in blocking a January 6th investigation. That's insane. That'd be like if Pearl Harbor happened, you're like, we're not going to find out who did it. 9/11 happened, right? We're not going to look into this. Because they can't look into it. It is them. Trumpism represents their way of life at this point. It's like I talk about all the time, the unlevel playing field, the mediocre white male, who gets ahead in life because his daddy made a lot of money and he sends his idiot son like Matt Gaetz to William and Mary Law School, and then dumb Matt Gaetz gets into Florida Senate, and then stupid racist Matt Gaetz, cokehead, pedophile predator gets to go to Congress, and he's under investigation now, and he's holding rallies, He just called on Silicon Valley people to get shot. He called on people to use their Second Amendment rights to defend against cancel culture and go show them what's up there in Silicon Valley. There's a leader in Congress telling people to take up arms and attack fellow Americans in Silicon Valley, which is about 20 minutes from San Jose, where they had yet another mass shooting 2 days ago where 8 people perished, right? And he's going to face no consequences for that because it is their brand now. They can't censure him. It is them. They are that. And they realize how much power is in that, and they went all in on it. That's their gig now, and they know it. That's the song they're playing. They're a crappy cover band, and they're playing Trump's greatest hits until that's the only music allowed,
Well, it's similar to, and I hate to put down a legend like Mick Foley, but we talked about professional wrestling on this show. There's a reason why Hulk Hogan, still walks down to the same music, flexes the same way, and does the ear cupping, to each side of the arena, because it's been working since the 1980s. Donald Trump is just like Hulk Hogan. He's got the same getup. He's just older, fatter, and a little slower, and it's really unfortunate that American politics has been permeated by like a WWE, professional wrestling, reality TV kind of scope. It's disappointing.
It's very disappointing, especially as, we have another Memorial Day weekend, and you had a president who said, those guys are losers. Why would I go to that cemetery? Those were a bunch of losers. You're a sucker if you give your life to defend this country. And people bought it because, like I say every week, he had a bunch of flags. He hugged the flag. He played the dumbass Lee Greenwood song. You know what I mean? He made fun of liberals, and he made fun of homosexual Americans and transvestites and everyone that, if you're ignorant, small of mind, feeble of heart, and cowardice in your community, you respond to that. Because dumb, unsophisticated people sit around their kitchen tables and make fun of things they don't understand. They make fun of Black Lives Matter because they're like, I don't get it. All cops are good guys. No, they're not. They're good to you because you're white. Your cousin Vinny's on the force, so you didn't get, thrown in the drunk tank when you came home on a DWI. There's something that's never talked about. White folks get out of jail free cards. If you grew up, especially where I do in New York, and somebody who's a cop, they give you their PBA card, or their business card. And you're allowed to show that to a cop that pulls you over, and it gets you out of that infraction. That's an unspoken thing that's gone on for decades in white America. They don't give them out to Black people. And I've been in cars where dudes use those cards, and I was like, please pull them over. Like he's drunk and I'm a passenger, like just take this guy and I had a guy get let go. We were in Jersey on Route 17, and then he got pulled over again. And I used to drink back then too. He got pulled over twice, and the second guy was like, no, the card doesn't work. Like, you're going to jail, buddy. And I was like, thank God, because I'm like, it was insane. But that's America. But the people that grow up in that are protected by it, they don't want to challenge it. Why would I challenge it? Don't break the law and you won't get in trouble. That's not true. That is not true at all. These people get shot in the back. And police brutality is rampant in this country. It's like, but people don't understand that. And Trump was able to, he instinctually knows those marks are out there. He knows America's full of these people, and Fox News has primed them for decades. So their brains are just completely malleable, and they get the right trigger words: the left, socialism, communism, transsexual, like all this kind of things that just make them be like, raw. We have to fight against that. How do I do that? You put this Punisher sticker on the back of your pickup truck and this flag, and you get a 48-ounce Mountain Dew, and you head down to the local arena, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are going to tell you how you fight against socialism to save America, right? People are buying it. Like how many offshoots? You made the wrestling analogy. Like they used to just have like Hulkmania or whatever the hell it was called when I was
Hulkamania.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just like there was like only a couple really famous wrestlers, and like now it's an entire industry. Your biggest stars are wrestlers. One of them just had to apologize to China this week, and he didn't even say anything wrong. He was saying the truth. Hong Kong is a country, but like, hey, that's a big market. We don't want to say that this big authoritarian country that's basically kind of our enemy in a governmental sense, not the people, but the government, we don't want to offend them because we can sell a lot of whatever the hell the WWE even sells, I don't know what the end product is, a Hulk Hogan mug or whatever the stupid crap is. And that's what I'm always talking about. That's our society. You got people numb and drunk on superheroes and cartoon characters, and they're being manipulated with that iconography. And Trump is a master of that. People think he's stupid. Look at the stuff he got away with. And he is stupid, but you're underestimating him if you're just like, oh, he's a joke. He's a dumbass. He's a dumbass who's gotten away with everything his whole life. Right? Yeah. He's a dumbass who now has the entire GOP voting this morning to not investigate the day that he told thousands of people to go attack the Capitol, to hang the vice president, right? Mm-hmm. But he's a mob boss, so he doesn't say hang him. He just goes, go tell Pence he's doing the wrong thing, Yeah. Send him a message. Let him know Donna wants to talk to him, That's the mob boss. Those guys know what they were doing. And all that other crap that they've been fed comes alive in those moments. They're like, I'm the Punisher now. I get to storm the Capitol. I finally get to, use my taser, and put 15 zip ties on my belt. Like, were you gonna take hostages? Like, this was insane. If that was a bunch of African American, rioters, right, or Muslims. It would have been a bloodbath. It would have been like Gettysburg. They would have been like put down on the field before they got to the Capitol. Okay. And the GOP would have had investigations until you're in your 70s, bro.
Yeah, my children would have to go through multiple ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, man. I mean, I hate to be this dark so early on into the show, but I mean, are we at a point with the GOP like, we can't go back now? They're a fascist party. Are they not? Like, we're at that point and we need to recognize it. They're beyond democracy.
Yep. No, we're absolutely at this point, and go dark. That's what this is about. I'll give my listeners, I know I'm normally not bubbly, but I'm pissed now because I'm tired of talking about this, but I'm not going to give up because it is worse now than it was when Trump was president. You are in more danger today than you were in December or October. And I know Biden won, and I know Biden's doing good things and accomplishing stuff, but he has a very limited window to be in there. Okay. And if the Republicans take back the House in November 2022, a year and a half from now, you're going to be in trouble. It's going to be all over. And what happened that gave us, the House and the Senate, like the runoff election in Georgia and things like that, they're making sure that never happens again. Mm-hmm. And you think that would be dying out. Those embers of that insanity and the big lie is not fizzling out. It's spreading. It's not only Arizona and Georgia now. I think there's a county in Oregon or Washington State that's going to allow some sort of recount. They're trying to do it in Pennsylvania. Basically anywhere where they have an elected Republican official who is sympathetic to Trumpism and the big lie and will allow them access to ballots. They can now hire these companies like cyber ninjas, people that have no experience ever dealing with ballots. They're just fronts for Trumpism and QAnon. They can go in and cause this chaos. And that is going to be the undoing of democracy because your votes aren't going to count anymore. Some states, state Secretary of State or Board of Elections head who's a Republican is going to be like, yep, we're not counting those votes. And it's going to happen. It's happening now. So they're making sure what happened doesn't happen again. They're disenfranchising voters. They're continuing to gerrymander districts, and they're continuing to sort of, gin up these soldiers. There's a reason that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are having rallies every weekend, that are selling out. There's a reason you have things like CPAC. There's a reason that Trump is like, give me money 24 hours a day, help the fight. His reason is he wants the money to defend himself, and hang out on his golf course and continue to grift. But like that has turned into a business model now. and
Right.
people are going to wake up and have a country that isn't there anymore. And they're going to be like, hey, what happened? Well, the Democrats didn't fight hard enough. You got to get rid of the filibuster. You got to act like this is
Right.
your last chance to legislate. Because I'll tell you what, if you lose it, you ain't getting it back in there. And don't count on the Republicans to do the right thing. They haven't censured Matt Gaetz. They haven't removed him from the Judiciary Committee. As I just said minutes ago, he called for armed insurrection against Silicon Valley. He's under investigation for child prostitution, or whatever nomenclature you want to use to describe his depravity. It's out in the open. He did it. And don't hold your breath that he's going to be held accountable by the legal system. That's another scam. Trump should have gone to jail in the 80s for what he did. He was a public crime figure in 1981 over the building of Trump Tower. I talked about that last week. He was using mob cement, and cutting deals with Teamsters during a strike to make sure his concrete flowed. And he did that by giving a penthouse away to the mobster's girlfriend. Right. And then he tried to wire it himself so he could spy on the mob. That's what Trump does, is he plays both sides of this thing. You think Mitch McConnell is not allowing a vote just because he likes Trump? No, because his wife is Elaine Chao, who is corrupt as fuck, whose family was probably bringing bales of cocaine over, on their shipping boats. The IG inspector said investigate her, and the Trump Department of Justice refused to do so. So that's what the Dems have to do. You have to say, all right, Mitch, you don't want to do this investigation? We're going to do another one into your wife, who conveniently resigned right after the insurrection 2 weeks later, right? We're going to look into her. The last Justice Department wouldn't, but we will. Let's open the books and look at all her ties to China. Let's look at all your ties to Deripaska, funding all of the, private coal mines in Kentucky. You're the most unpopular senator that's ever been in Kentucky, and the guy hasn't lost an election there since the 80s.
And plus, Mitch, when you look at his hand, like he fell last year, right? He was all bruised up, and then his hand is like leaking fluid and bodily fluid. Like the guy, he seems to be falling apart in real time, both, his human body and his ideology. I mean, the guy's just scum. I don't know how we even elect these folks. How do they get in a position of power like that to be elected? That's my question.
I just explained it. But back to Mitch McConnell, you know what I said about him last year when that was happening? I said he looks like something that a jogger would find under a pile of leaves at the beginning of Law and Order. He looks like a corpse, like you find him in the woods. He is falling apart. He's rotting from within, because that's what that does to you. The hate that these guys are spewing, you're now seeing the toxic effects of that in our society. And we have a really big problem on our hands that we need to start addressing. I'm sure everyone saw the video of the lady punching the flight attendant on the airplane that came out, this week. Like, that was disgusting. That turned my stomach. Here's a woman punching a flight attendant in the face to the point she bloodied her face on an airplane in front of children, I believe in front of her own children. And that's where people are at now. They think you're the other, I can attack you. That's the gift that Trump gave them, for lack of a better word. There was a motel owner in Michigan this week too, whose family happens to own all the motels in that particular resort area. And like they controlled the city council to the point like there's no Airbnbs allowed, so they don't lose any money, and they have a monopoly on all the hotels. And this mother was there. It was two mothers were there with their children, and they rented a couple of rooms or something. And one of the rooms, the toilet started overflowing. The water was rushing out. It's flooding the hotel room. So she went to the front desk and was like, hey, the room's flooding. Like, what do I do? How do I turn it? Where's the valve to turn off the water? And he's like, I told you, you dumbass, you dumb Democrat. I already told you, get out of here. If you don't like it, leave, and I'm charging you anyway. He completely shut off his humanity to her, and just kept staring at his phone like, you're a liberal, screw you. This guy's the hotel manager. He's on duty, and it went viral, and they suspended him or whatever until it dies down, and then he'll get his job back. But my point is, I've said this before, you don't divide a nation. That's the worst thing you can do to a people, is divide them against themselves, to think that your other person is the enemy. And this isn't even, and there's no there's never a case for division, right? And you can never understand it, right? But this is not even like where you can see how ignorance could take an easier hold, like, oh, that person's black or they're Muslim, or I don't understand them, they're foreign to me. These are like two white people in Michigan. You know what I mean? You grew up on the same Wonder Bread. You grew up listening to the same Bob Seger tunes. Like, that person is not your enemy, and you don't know, nobody's your enemy. You know what I mean? But my point is, if people can catch it, is like, he's divided people that look just like each other, neighbors. That's what you had in a civil war. It's like cousins shooting cousins because they were born on the different side of a line, an imaginary line that you drew in the sand, or in the cornfield. But that's where we're at. And that's the legacy of Trumpism. And I can feel it. I can feel the anger, the trauma, because we've all been through trauma in this last year, whether you want to admit it or not. I say, like, most of us must be suffering from some kind of PTSD, and I have PTSD. Like, I had a traumatic stuff happen in my childhood where, like, I've been diagnosed with that, and I've had to deal with it. It's not on the level of somebody who went to, Vietnam or Iraq or something, but trauma is trauma. It's going to affect you a certain way, and you have to deal with it. And there's no shame in dealing with that. But we haven't even addressed that. We're just kind of like, yep, things are opening up. It's going to move on, get to time to go back to the baseball game or whatever, no, we need to deal with this and heal. And also resentment, like, I'll say this one more thing and then you can talk, but resentment is the number one offender. If you're in recovery like I am, the most dangerous thing that you have to watch out for is anger building up in you. Anger is a dubious luxury, of normal men, is what you say if you're an alcoholic in recovery, because you can't afford to get angry, because resentment is a poison, and it poisons the host. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and Trump just fed people resentment. Fox News is feeding resentment 24 hours a day. Social media is feeding resentment. So you're taking in all this poison. Eventually, it's going to come out because you're going to be in so much pain. You're going to strike out at somebody, whether that's a woman in the middle of the night, a mother who's trying to, be like, how do I stop my kids from floating away in my hotel room? And you just tell her to fuck off and leave in the middle of the night, which is what this guy did. And these families had nowhere to go. Like that. Talk about un-American. That's un-American. That's what he's given us. These people that are pretending to be patriots have turned their backs on any sort of ethos and morality that we used to pretend was the glue of this nation. Even though we excluded others from that for our entire history, at least the white folks kind of lived in this dumbass denial. We're good apple pie people and we stop and help you fix a tire. No, now we give you the finger as we ride down the road, or shoot you because we feel threatened by you.
Well, and the fact, you had Senator Ted Cruz go to Mexico. He fled the United States to Mexico during the time that Texas had the power grids go down. And you were talking about trauma through the pandemic and everything else that's happened. We had a mental health problem before the pandemic happened. Then you isolate people in their homes. All of the things that have gone on since then. And you were talking about your own battles with PTSD. I'm sure I have it. Between all the death that I've seen in my family, the Trumpism the last 4 years, and the pandemic, I certainly have it. It's undiagnosed, but we have a fractured people, both mentally and financially. There's been so many different areas of American life that have been tarnished that, we talked about having a holistic approach, and we only have so much time. Again, going back to our theme of it today, that that they could take back the House by midterms. I'm sorry to be so hopeless, but it's like, man, even when we thought we won, we're in a losing situation.
Absolutely. And we'll lose more than just that year we just lost. We opened the show talking about, a lost year of American progress. It takes a long time to dig out of a hole that is a psychological one. Depression, I've suffered from depression, active alcoholism, addiction, all that stuff, and all that stuff. There's no shame in any of that, but you have to treat it, and you just mentioned isolation. That's the worst thing for somebody like an alcoholic or something, or anybody who's suffering, from mental illness, which alcoholism and addiction is a form of mental illness. And there's no shame in mental illness. We got to remove the stigma and we got to treat people. It's okay to feel your feelings. The flip side of this is while he's giving them all this resentment and grievance, they're also pushing this message of this toxic masculinity, right. Which is like, I don't cry, I don't feel anything. No, that's dumb. That's just dumb. That's just going to make you an asshole. That's just going to make you mean to your kids and your wife, if not violent towards them, and then you're going to pour alcohol on those feelings or drugs, on that unhealed trauma. And you're going to become a monster, And I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene today talking about like, the left wants to take away your masculinity. Well, it looks like she already took it all, right? She already swallowed up all the masculinity. She's got all my testosterone in a mayonnaise jar in her freaking, in her troll lair. But, the point is that toxic BS is BS. It's exactly what it is. It's propaganda, but it was fed into this same thing. And that's by design. You mentioned Ted Cruz. He was tweeting out Nazi boy porn last week, like, look at the Russian army. Those are Hollister models, dude. That's not really the Russian model. You know what I'm saying? That's like, those are extras from 500, and you're whacking off to that thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's hot, isn't it, Ted? That's what people should have asked him. Like, those dudes are sexy AF. It didn't have anything to do with his emasculated thing. He was like, man, I'll take some of that, and there's no shame in that. But it's like, and that's the other thing too, is that, the same people that are sort of homophobic in this toxic masculinity are also very like homoerotic in their imagery.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, football's cool because you see these guys in these tight pants, right? Nobody wants to admit it, but the physique is attractive, right? There's a reason they wear tight pants. Now, every football fan is gonna be like, nah, man, that ain't me, dude. That ain't why I'm looking at it. Why? You can't see it looks good? You know what I'm saying? It looks good. It's attractive. It's muscular. It's physique. There's beautiful things about men and women that both sides can appreciate. And you don't have to look. Jimmy's mind's blown. If anyone can see, he's blushing. He's like, I never made that connection. That ain't.
Well, I mean, I was gonna say, man, LeBron is an Adonis. I'll say it right now.
Exactly.
He's a freak, and everybody wants to see a guy like that perform at a top level. It's what people do.
Right. That's what sports are. There's a sexual charge to the whole thing. You don't have to deny it.
Tom Brady's hot. I'll be the first to admit it. Tom Brady's hot, man. He's cool.
Now you've gone too far, bro.
Sorry. My bad.
Anybody's listening and you want to produce the Noel Casler podcast?
Oh, no.
My man just praised Tom Brady. He can't come back from that. Yeah, no, Tom Brady's a great looking guy, obviously, but he's a cheater, But I've met Tom Brady. Don't get me started on Tom Brady.
I'm a Colts fan, man.
I know. I did too many Super Bowls with Tom Brady. He could have been such a good guy, and he's just not. And all the Boston listeners are going to get mad. But when we could go right into Robert Kraft. It came out yesterday that Trump was trying to get Arlen Specter to lobby on behalf of Robert Kraft during the Inflategate, hearings or whatever.
The fact that they had hearings on Deflategate, they could have beaten the Colts with golf balls that day. Wouldn't have mattered.
I know. And everybody knows the Patriots cheated. They had a murderer on their team. They knew the guy was a murderer. I can't believe I was on the same field with that guy when I watched the documentary Aaron Hernandez. Yeah, because I would walk up and down their sidelines. I was like in some of those Super Bowls. I'm like, oh my God, I was that close to a murderer. They knew he was a murderer long before, if you watch the doc, they didn't let him go until they had to, But I don't want to get on that tangent, but it's, you can see why the Republicans love him. You can see why Trump loved the Patriots, and Tom Brady had a thing with Ivanka too. They had a little tryst and stuff. And
no way.
Yeah. And Trump used to be like, I could have had him as a son and I got Jared over here, and he was a judge on one of the Miss Universe pageants as well. They go way back. Yeah. But anyway, we're getting off on a tangent, but my point is toxic masculinity. Okay. When it's sold to you by a party that's also demonizing the other, and anti-LGBTQ, and homophobic, That's just horrible, because then you have people in this internal battle with themselves, and you have people afraid to be who they are. And it's once again stuffing those emotions, boys don't cry kind of BS,
Mm-hmm.
and you see what that does to men. It hardens them and it makes them ever insecure. So then they have to reach for things to make them feel secure and strong. And that's where the NRA comes in. All this stuff is a toxic brio designed to build upon each other as a profit scheme. Fox News lays the groundwork for the NRA. Fox News doing all these reports on muggings being up in all these cities, and, the blacks are coming for you, and Antifa is going to come and rape and kill your family in the middle of the night, right? And then the NRA steps in. Well, here, a true patriot has an AR-15 or 10 of them in their home to protect against this stuff. And these guys that are sitting on the couch with their beer bellies, and their bro beards, watching football, knowing they can never compete against one of those Adonises that they're watching on the basketball court and stuff, knowing that they physically don't really measure up against the black man. And let's face it, that's always been one of the things going on in this country. White men are threatened by black men physically, and certainly mentally, because they're obviously just as equal as all humans are, right? So that's why you get those two tropes, like we're smarter, like no, racism is based in fear. You're scared of the other, so you're trying to dehumanize them, or you're trying to cover for your own defects. And all of that stuff plays into the person that's then like, I got to defend myself against that. I need weapons and guns,
I've experienced the same thing when it comes to sports, man. Like it's subtle, like it's not obvious, but there are some folks that I knew in college, I would talk sports with them and I would make a counterpoint that they didn't think of, and they would resent me for it. They'd say, oh, you're full of crap. And then they would use it the next day on their show. Like it's what people do because they're embarrassed of their own shortfalls. So they're going to blame somebody else. It's the easiest thing. Instead of taking personal responsibility, which is what the Republican Party touts themselves as, they're going to blame somebody else. It's what they do. And it's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, and a lot of people get played like a fiddle on both sides of this thing. A lot of members of the press never rose to the occasion. Everybody's like this week, like, Jeff Bezos is going to have the Apprentice tapes. Right. No, he's not. No, he's not. Calm down. Whatever tweet you saw, that dude was looking for likes. That's called clickbait. Okay. There's not going to be a little box saying, hey, Jeff, here's the Apprentice tapes with all Trump saying the N-word, which I told you about, which Kwame Jackson already told you about, which Holly Robinson Pete told you about. Believe the black people that already saw it firsthand. Why are you waiting for the white savior billionaire to come and make it available to you? And he's not gonna, okay? Because Mark Burnett also owns The Voice and Survivor and Shark Tank and all these other really profitable properties that if those tapes are released, those properties go down in value because people realize, hey, Mark Burnett was sitting right next to Trump in the helicopter when he's saying all this stuff. Maybe I shouldn't be watching his show. Maybe NBC shouldn't re-up the contract, right? So Bezos isn't paying $8.5 billion for a company that he wants to immediately deflate the value of, okay? Mm-hmm. And if he was so interested in that, he owns a newspaper called The Washington Post, okay? If he wanted to get, on record that Trump used the N-word, he has about, 300 reporters that he could have put on the story at any point in the last 5 years to get the truth. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in stoking outrage and getting eyeballs and clicks on articles, but never digging deep. You don't think other people knew that Trump was on drugs? The dude would use cocaine openly in the 80s in clubs. He sat in the back of the limo outside VH1 Glamour Women of the Year in 2000 and did lines in front of my buddy, Billy Amato, the transportation coordinator. You could see him right through the window. He snorted Adderall on the Apprentice set, Celebrity Apprentice, when I was there. It was no secret. But people buy this myth and they don't want to look at the real truth because media, and magazines and things like that were big business for a long time. And they were the domain of the Ivy League educated. If you wanted to go work at a big magazine in New York City when you got out of, a big fancy journalism school, you went to you moved to New York and you became a fact checker. and you got that job through a connection that you had because you went to Penn or somewhere, right? And you worked your way up the ranks, and then you got to write the little articles and the puff pieces, and then you became an investigative reporter, and then you wrote cover stories, and you made a lot of money, and maybe you became an editor someday, okay?
Right.
But you never looked at the salacious stuff. Yes, you would write about murders and these kind of like big, sensational stories, but you didn't talk about things like Trump, having sex with underage girls, Trump using drugs, all this kind of stuff that, they wrote about Trump a gazillion times in the 80s and 90s. Like he was on the cover every day when I was in high school, right? But nobody really talked about that. Even when these things were facts, what he did to Ivana was a fact of his divorce. She testified under oath. Yeah, he ripped my hair out and raped me, because he didn't like the scalp reduction that my plastic surgeon gave him. So he said, you ruined my life, ripped out her hair and raped her. That's the kind of guy he is. Right. And that was no secret to anybody. The dude was a monster, but he was a wealthy white man, and his name was on the side of the building, and magazines were making money off of putting him on the cover because now he's getting divorced and he's hooking up with Marla Maples. Better put that on the post every day. Right. It's all the same thing. You don't, CNN knew who he was. Jeff Zucker was the dude who gave him the job at the Voice, who put not the Voice, the Apprentice, right? Jeff Zucker was the head of NBC Universal Entertainment, the same company that does put the Voice on, another Mark Burnett property. Like this stuff is all related.
Well, and one crazy thing that concerns me about journalism, at least in the future, you have these companies are continuing to merge. You had Time Warner and AT&T a few years ago merge. The ownership is getting more concentrated when it comes to media. So there's less and less voices out there, which only, kind of deflates the truth because you're only hearing it from so many different perspectives.
Absolutely. And somebody like Trump, who's so media savvy, okay, who used to pretend like he was his own publicist and, hey, this is John Barron and I need to tell story. Trump was seen with not one, not two, but three beautiful models last night at Bungalow 8. They say he satisfied them all until the wee hours, like that was literally the kind of crap he would call up and tell these news desks. But he knows better than anybody else that the media and the legit media, okay, little made up magazines you see on Twitter, that's not media. Okay. That's not media. Media is the New York Times, the Washington Post, a lot of magazines, serious magazines, Time Magazine, that's media, that's mainstream media. Those kind of places are not going to print a story unless it's corroborated by three sources. Trump knows that. That's why he got away with the Adderall. That's why he had Keith Schiller and another big bodyguard go to Harold Bornstein's office, after he got elected and take his medical records, because he knew without those records, it wasn't coming out. I talked to one of the biggest journalists in the country, in the history of our country, who happens to be a friend of mine. And I told him all I knew, and I gave him one other corroborating source. You couldn't get the third source. And that guy told me it's the doctor. The doctor's the key to this story. And that doctor happened to die in January, mysteriously, days after he's dead. Trump's doctor since the 80s, Dr. Feelgood, Dr. Bornstein, who doled out pills on the Upper East Side for Park Avenue wives for 40 years and got sued because some people would OD because he would overprescribe you. He was a guy you went to get drugs. He's a gastroenterologist. Trump made him his primary physician in the 80s. You know what I mean? If you've ever seen the guy, he's got long hair. He looks like somebody you buy drugs from, And I know people who got drugs from him. I know people who know him. It was no secret. He was on like East 79th or some 78th Street, his office. And that's my neighborhood, and that's also where I'm in recovery. So I know people with serious pill addictions on the Upper East Side that got their pills from this guy, as did Trump forever, and that's why he went and got the records, right? But without that, you're not proving it. And Trump knows you're not going to prove it. So he makes the media the enemy, but he also survives by the ethics that the media has. Do you know what I mean? Like every time he would talk about how you're a shady reporter, you're a liar, deep down, he knows they have complete ethics and they're not going to say something until it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt, because the editors think they're going to get sued. So then you don't get the true stories. The New York Times wrote about the 13-year-old who's completely credible, who gave a deposition that Trump raped her, in Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse on East 71st Street, where a friend of mine was one of those women who went in there, and said, you won't believe the things that men did to women in there. She said, you don't even want to know, Noel. And I'm like, you're right. I do not want to know. But I can imagine, but anyway, everyone knew who Trump was, but the media wasn't going to dig deep on that. The New York Times did do some pieces. Trump was supposed to, go to court. He was going to be deposed on this thing, and it went away.
As POTUS, yes.
What?
As president of the United
Before
States.
This was in the fall of 2016.
Okay.
What happened was the woman made the mistake of hiring Lisa Bloom, who's kind of a fixer, for misogynists, basically. Lisa Bloom tried to set up my friend Kathy Griffin. You think she's going to be on your side if you hire her, but she's really on the side of, the Weinstein types and stuff. So this girl hired Lisa Bloom and then blew up basically her, who she was. And then the girl got too many death threats and stuff in her family, and she withdrew the charges or whatever.
Yeah.
The layman's version of that story, but the girl misstepped and trusted the wrong people, and the story went away. And then Trump became president and nobody wanted to revisit it. It's on Twitter. You can see the girl's deposition. It's plain as day because the language is Trump's language.
Right.
Just like if you listen to E. Jean Carroll, there's a piece in her telling of the horrible thing that Trump did to her, where she talks about walking around in Bergdorf Goodman, and he had to pick out a scarf for his secretary or something. And she'd be like, how's this one? And he'd be like, oh, that's an ugly one. Not that one. That's right. Trump. He's a contrarian. He always says the wrong, he always says you're doing it wrong. And that's what that girl had in her deposition. Trump was yelling at her and another girl that they weren't filleting him properly. You're doing it wrong. That's Trump. Think about what I just said. Do you know what filleting means?
Well, I mean, it's an odd thing that he gets aroused when he's angry.
Right. Violence is part of it. Brutality is part of it. It's dominance. It's not sex. Rape is a violent act. It's got nothing to do with sex. It's about men trying to exert their dominance over women. And that's Trump in every interaction. Look at him in the press conferences. You sit down. You're a nasty woman. You shouldn't be asking me that question. Like he would lose it. The guy I knew, you saw more often than not in those pressers that were always happening a year ago, when his narcissism made him go out in front of the cameras every day because he knew everybody was home and going to watch. And then he just attacked reporters, female reporters, right? He didn't go off on the guys too much. He went off on the women.
Well, and he does it with his handshake even, with the jerking motion. Did you ever shake his hand? Did you ever get to experience that first?
God, no.
Okay.
God, no.
You would want Purell after that handshake, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a weird thing. I've talked with body language experts on my show about how Trump acts. He's a sadist. He likes seeing people in pain, and he's a psychopath. We've talked about it before. He has no feeling or understanding of other people's emotions or pain.
No, he's a psychopath. Had he been born poor in the Bronx, nature would have taken its course and he would have never seen his 20s because somebody else's father would have murdered him, because he threw rocks at babies. That's what he did in Queens. He threw rocks at the neighbor's baby when the baby was in its playpen in the neighbor's yard. That's a troubled kid. Psycho killers torture animals and stuff. There's telltale signs of this dude ain't right. And Trump had all of them flashing in neon on his forehead since he was a little kid. But he had rich families and he was the scion of, a father who was deeply corrupt, who was, building buildings on behalf of the Genovese crime family and needed to pass it on to somebody, and the older son was an alcoholic. The younger son was an alcoholic. Trump was a cokehead. So, he gets the gig, even though he's a psychopath. So they send him, to boarding school, which was military school, which was reform school. He tries to throw his roommate out the window. He said the major leagues were scouting him. They had to buy all his school records. They had to support that school every year, build gymnasiums and all this stuff to protect the records for the entire time. And then the school really needed him, or it was going to be destroyed. And Trump was like, well, everything comes to an end. And they let the school get destroyed.
Well, and my understanding is that Freddie was a good guy. People liked Freddie, his brother, right? The one that died early.
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah, I never heard anything really bad about the older brother.
I mean, and Mary, that's Freddie's
Yes,
daughter, the
daughter.
one that wrote. And it wasn't until hers got sold to Simon and Schuster, right? And then that became public, and she went on Mad Al and the whole thing. I mean, that goes back to, it's all interconnected
Exactly.
from the media to the way that it's projected out to the public. It's all
Exactly.
interconnected.
Exactly. You've been paying attention, grasshopper. Good. Jimmy's making the point that, it became this breathless breaking news when Mary Trump, who's great and follows me, I follow her on Twitter. I applaud her, and she's got one of the 14 lawsuits that Trump's now facing. I think it's 14. Who can keep track? But when she said he uses the N-word, it became breaking news. When a white woman with a contract at Simon and Schuster says it, it's a big deal. And now Maddow can report on it. They can't report on it when it's Kwame Jackson, or when it's some comedian like me who was, a talent escort on the show or whatever, and part of that is legit, because managers and editors and people need to know like information is true before they put it out on a corporate medium. But part of it is like, we're not going to tell this story until another corporation can make money off it. Simon and Schuster is on 6th Avenue right next door to NBC. There's a, they're a block apart, and Fox News is right across the street. And that's what people also don't realize is how small a conglomeration all of mass media is. It's all the same people getting wealthy. The whole Trump thing was a local story to me. Epstein's house was down the street. I'm at 93rd and 5th, but I shouldn't give my address, but whatever. Epstein's at 71st. Larry Kudlow's next door to me until he goes to DC. Geraldo Rivera's around the corner. Bette Midler's at the end of the block. Like, everybody that I would see fighting on Twitter, it was like, this is all in the same neighborhood. This is all the same type of thing. And it's like, which side are you going to get on to make your buck? Beware of grifters on either side of the situation. I would like to warn people on that.
Well, a guy that's going to be in town for the Indy 500 this week that you're, or at least you've said in previous shows, David Letterman. He's a guy that lives in your neighborhood, and I've been reading the book The Late Shift about how like Johnny Carson left the Tonight Show, and Jay got the Tonight Show, and they were battling it out. It's interesting to hear the politics to go along with that, man. But yeah, it's so unfortunate that like the entire system again is interconnected, really unfortunate.
Absolutely. And Letterman lives by my country house, by the way, not in my city neighborhood.
Oh, okay. My bad, man. Just wanted, yeah, just wanted to check. He's got a full Letterman racing team, and he's won it before. Buddy Rice won it 1 year back in the day.
No, obviously he's a huge car guy, but he's also, he drives a Leaf now. He drives an electric car. He's hip to what we have to be in terms of the environmental stuff, And Leno invited me to his garage last year. I interviewed him on another show that I used to co-host, the Stuttering John show. And Letterman, Leno was like, hey man, if you're ever in LA, you come to my garage. Like, you got an invite to come to my garage. I'd be all over that. Isn't that awesome?
That'd be great, man. What car would you want to drive out of his garage?
I'm into mid 60s. My favorite car I ever had was an Oldsmobile Cutlass convertible 65. Wow. I like those old, like big old boats, you just float down the road. I like the long angular lines. I like a big comfy seat. Like, I want to be floating on air. Give me a mid 60s Cadillac or Oldsmobile Buick. I don't care what it is. That was the height of American stuff, from the 50s to the mid 60s. It was like, we couldn't make a bad product. A guitar, an amplifier, a car, a television, like everything had such style. This Art Deco kind of modernism thing was just, it was just, God, it was amazing. We made so many cool things, and so I like that period. That way, I'm not a fast car kind of guy, I'd never get in a car again if I had my way. Like, I don't like cars. I hate being in cars. I'm in them all the time. I toured with bands, so a lot of my life was spent on a tour bus. Every night it was like in a bus riding from Indiana, to Kentucky or something. So I've done my miles, and on my day off, I get on a bicycle or I go for a walk or something. I don't want to be in a car, but if I got to be in a car, I want to be in a comfortable car. I don't want to be in a little Porsche sitting with my legs out. My town is a big race car town. Like people come here to drive like Ferraris and stuff every Sunday.
Okay.
There's Lamborghinis because the roads are really twisty and kind of cool country roads. So it's a thing, right?
Yeah.
So every Sunday, like Seinfeld comes here with his Porsches and stuff. Every Sunday, there'll be all these people riding these super fancy cars around. I mean, super fancy, like you'll see 15 Ferraris, in a Peloton or whatever you call it, just going. But, and I've been to Monaco too, where you really see fancy cars.
Oh, wow.
Monaco is like Monte Carlo and stuff. You see some stuff that's like, oh my God, McLarens, these big, just in crazy stuff. But anyway, so that's cool. Indy 500, man.
Yeah, a lot going on. Speaking of driving, I'm actually apprehensive about driving. I hate it. Having a disability, I have to drive with hand controls. No, I don't know if you've ever seen someone use hand controls to drive, but you've got like the turn signal is where the brake is, the gas and brake. So like when I'm driving, I can't answer the phone or switch the radio station, like whatever I'm listening to. So if I'm listening to the Noel Casler podcast when I'm starting, I'm going to be listening to it when I get out of the car. A good way to describe it for the folks at home for how my brain works. Drive out of your driveway and around the block and try to snap your fingers at the same time while you're doing that. That's kind of how my doctor described it. It's hard for folks with disabilities to keep multiple things in track, and that's what you have to do when you're driving. So
oh man, that's awesome, dude. But I mean, it's not awesome that you have to struggle, or that you have to like.
I'm glad it's there as an option, but I would love to live in a place like New York where public transportation is obviously more available than it is in Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I've always stayed in New York City, because I am somebody who wants to ride a bike. I mean, I was a bike messenger. I've ridden a bike since I was a kid. I got my first bike in 3rd grade. I was like, this is the perfect form of transportation. Like, why doesn't everybody just use these all the time? And you go to Europe, they do. You go to like a Dutch, you go to the Holland or something, they're everywhere. They
don't even have bike racks either. They don't even lock them up because there's no crime.
Dude, check this out. I was on tour, last CSN tour, Crosby, Stills and Nash. We were in like Den Haag or somewhere, right? Somewhere around there, Holland somewhere, Iceland or something. And I look out of my hotel room and there's a train station, right? So like the train station would take you were sort of outside of town a little bit, in the center of town. This was probably outside of Amsterdam or something. So people would bike to the train station and then they'd take the train into the downtown area, right? And I was at my hotel room, looked down on this train station, and I saw all these bikes pull up in the morning, like 1,000 of them, right? And they were like all super high-end bikes. They were like Treks, like Canada, like really good bikes. Not a single person locked up their bike. They just left them there, got on the train, went and worked 8 hours, came back on the train, and just knew their bike was going to be there, right? And I was like, this is mind-blowing. Like in New York City, that bike would have been stripped by the time you got the elevator down to the street. Your bike would have been gone, right? These people don't even lock up their bikes. We did the concert, and I was a road manager, so part of my job is making sure everything's secure and stuff. And I noticed that one of the doors to the from the audience where the house is to like the backstage area didn't have a guard. It wasn't locked. And somebody was like, hey, Noel, make sure like nobody can get in there or something. The door's not even locked or something, So I go and I talk to like the manager or the house manager, and I say, hey, can we get a guard or something on that door, which is what you do anywhere in America, so people don't sneak backstage, right? He goes, oh, don't worry. People know not to come through that door.
Wow.
Right?
Man.
It's like, just people know because they don't belong to, they're not going to, they don't want to, it's a personal virtue. It's not like I can get away with something. It's like, why would I want to go somewhere I don't belong? Why wouldn't I want to follow the rules? Why wouldn't I want to steal something? And it's not to say that things don't happen. People stuff, you get bad apples everywhere. Sometimes people probably get their bikes stolen, but they're not going to live in fear. They're not going to live in locking everything up 24 hours a day, which is what we do, because there's a big industry in fear. There's a big industry in not trusting your fellow American. And to wrap it all up, that's what we're talking about. That's the damage that Trump did, is that he turned us against each other, and it became an industrialized version of not trusting your fellow man. And now you don't trust the other political party. And now you don't trust the neighbor, and eventually you don't trust yourself, right? And you don't trust your own family, and you don't trust your own thoughts, and you don't trust your own emotion, and you're broken. You're in trouble when you get to that point.
Well, I think I saw it yesterday on MSNBC. There's now an open investigation into like violations that Ukraine had against the 2020 election. Like every story that was put on Fox News that was allegedly, a Democrat perpetrated it, the Republicans are actually doing it, or a GOP pro-Trump type of agenda is the one that's actually pushing it. This misinformation causes folks to question themselves and their own reality. We've talked about that on multiple shows.
Absolutely. And the Eastern District of New York, sort of the cousin to the SDNY, is opening an investigation into Rudy Giuliani's involvement in spreading the Ukrainian disinformation, on behalf of the Ukrainians. Like, it's so mind-boggling. You can't lose sight of that. We can't, like, Bob Dylan had a song, Ballad of a Thin Man. It said, something's happening here, but you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones? Right? Like, there's a message in that song, and it's never been more needed than now. And people really need to look at what's happening, really, dig deep in themselves and decide, like, are we going to allow this? Because don't let it go by too quickly, because you're going to wake up and it's gone, and not many republics have stood, like if you look at the history books, like, time isn't on our side, and we're an experiment, and we're an experiment that isn't guaranteed to last, especially when you have such powerful forces, not just outside, not just Putin and stuff, but inside, when you have the Koch brothers and you have all this money funneled into things, when you have super PACs, when you think that somebody's telling you the truth, question it. What I always tell people about the drug stuff, they're like, prove it. I'm like, I don't need to prove it to you. It's not my job to prove it. Yeah, look at the dude, make your own decision. Don't believe me. As a matter of fact, don't believe me. People are always like, why doesn't Michael Cohen say he does? Use your own judgment on that. I never met Michael Cohen. He wasn't in the room when I saw Trump doing it. It was Keith Schiller, okay? Trump was trying to sell you, Michael Cohen was trying to sell you a book, that he was Trump's body man. And no, he wasn't. He was one of his lawyers. He was the guy who paid off the porn stars and lied on his behalf. And had Trump taken Michael Cohen to Washington, you never would have heard from him again, right? The first gig he got, he was on the National Republican Council, right? And he was a deputy finance chair with Elliot Broidy, who got indicted, and with Steve Wynn, who's now under another investigation, who's going to get sued by the Department of Justice, right? Two scumbags and Michael Cohen, who flew around the country and said, give money to the RNC if you want to do business with President Trump, right? That was the first gig that Michael Cohen had. And then Trump didn't take him to Washington. Then he still lied about business and, in Russia and stuff. And then he finally came to when he was going to go to prison, and between the two of us, only one of us have gone to prison for lying, and it ain't me. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm not trying to attack his character, but use your own judgment. He still lives in Trump Park Avenue. Okay. Trump wasn't just doing drugs himself. Okay. Trump was selling cocaine out of Trump Tower in the 80s and 90s. He's in business with other people. If I still lived in one of his buildings with my family, I wouldn't be telling you he did drugs either. Also, if I owned taxi medallions and I was on probation, I wouldn't be like, yeah, I knew the guy. So, people give you what they want to give you. I'm not selling you a book. I'm not selling you this podcast. It's free. And I don't care if you believe me. What I'm asking you to do is look for yourself at things and question why people, are or are not telling you things. But ultimately, trust yourself, trust but verify, as they say. And I gave a Dylan shout out. You want to say something? I'm going to tell a Dylan story.
You go ahead. No, go ahead and get into
that.
All right.
Dylan so it was Dylan's birthday, 80th birthday last week, And Dylan, I studied Dylan in high school. Most people were studying like in their classes. I was not that student. Okay. I was studying music and songwriters and, progressive politics. That's where my interests lie. I didn't have the I just didn't have it together to be a good student. I came from a pretty, kind of a broken home to some extent. I had a lot of good family that looked out for me, but I had some struggles as a kid, and concentrating in class was not going to be part of my thing. And I knew what I was going to do anyway, whatever that is. I knew I was going to be part of the arts. So I would study Dylan, and I even tried to, he was playing at Wolf Trap one time. I used to go see him all the time, and he was playing at Wolf Trap, and me and my roommate snuck backstage. Wolf Trap is like a national park service. It runs the place. I've done the gig with Jackson Browne and Crosby, Stills and Nash and stuff. And when I was like in my early 20s and I still used to drink, we got drunk and snuck backstage. The opposite of your Dutch fans, right?
Yeah.
And we wanted to sneak on the bus, and I started to open up the luggage bay of his bus. And I was like, I'm just going to get in the luggage bay, and then they'll have to take me on the road with them, and then when we get to the next hotel, I'll just pop out like a stowaway, and I'll be part of the Dylan tour, And and I do all this, and then I realize, oh shit, he's playing here tomorrow night too. You know what I mean? Like there would have been no driving away. Like, so I got out, and then the park police found us and kicked us out of there. But so cut to like 10 years later, 1998, I'm working the Grammys. At this point, I've been in showbiz for about 5 years. The Grammys were at Radio City Music Hall, and Dylan was performing on the show. And I'm like, here's my big chance to meet Dylan, And I was like assigned to Sean Colvin that night. That was the night Old Dirty Bastard ran up on stage, if you remember. She was getting an award. And we always talk about that when I see Sean. Her and John Leventhal were heading up there, the great guitar player. Roseanne Cash's husband. Roseanne Cash also had a birthday last week. Shout out to Roseanne, same day as Bob Dylan. And but anyway, so Dylan's performing. We have this big performance. Time Out of Mind, I think, was the album that came out. And we had this whole background chorus that was part of his performance. They were just hired extras who were basically just going to stand there, So I'm like, I look at the sheet, and I'm like, all right, Dylan's exit stage left, at 9:25 or whatever. I'm going to make sure I'm right there. And when he comes off the stage, I'm going to be, it's a tiny little area. I'm going to be right there, and I'm going to be like, hey, Bob Dylan, and shake his hand just so I can say I met him, right? So I get into position. Dylan's performing. I'm on the side of the stage. I'm kind of looking on the monitor. I see some crazy stuff going down. Next thing I know, the security's pulling this half-naked dude past me, right? Who across his chest had the words written, "Soy bomb." And it was this guy who considered himself like a performance artist, and he disrupted Dylan's performance on live television. He jumped off and started doing this crazy dance behind Dylan as he's performing. And it was this horrible thing. And security had to pull the guy off stage. And then, of course, everything kind of went into lockdown. And when Dylan finally came off stage, there was just, you weren't going to meet him. He was surrounded by security guys, and they got him out of there. And I was so pissed at this soy bomb guy, because it became this huge story then, like in the press and all this stuff. So a day or two later, I called the guy up. I found his number because his name was in the press. He's like still a performance artist. And I called him up and cursed him out. And I'm like, hey, asshole, you screwed up my chance to meet Bob Dylan, And he's like, I think Dylan would have respected what I did. I was doing like what he would do in the 60s and being a protest. And I was like, screw you, buddy, And so that was my big chance to meet Dylan. I blew it. I'd later worked on like Music Cares, honored Dylan a few years ago, and Crosby, Stills and Nash perform. And Dylan hung out all day, but he sat in a trailer, and he would only talk to Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and somebody else. I forget who.
That's elite company already, man.
Tom Petty. Right. So yeah, like I'm not, yeah. Hey, Tom, Willie, you mind if I hop say hi to Bobby? But he gave a great speech that night. He reminded us all why he's Bob Dylan. He gave a really brilliant speech that night. So, anything that's happening now, Dylan told us about it in a song. You can go back through the catalog. The dude was a prophet in many ways. And Tears of Rage is one of my favorite performances. The Richard Manuel version that the band played at Woodstock. It's all right there. And that song plays in my head as I look at what we're going through these days. So, find some of that truth that Dylan gave us, get a little of that outrage in your veins, roll up your sleeves and get ready to work, because the fight is still upon us. This is not a time to relax. This is a time to fight for your democracy, take care of each other, heal, express those emotions, and be well. And until next week, have a great week. Jimmy, you got any parting thoughts?
We have a republic. If we can keep it, let's keep it.
There you go. You heard it from Jimmy himself. If you see him out there on the roads, wave to him, but don't expect him to wave back. Right?
I'll diverge into the next lane.
There you go. Hey, I appreciate you sharing that, man. We need more insights like that. Let us know things you have to go through that are different. Like, let people know, because that helps everybody, man.
Let me say a funny thing. When I go out on a date with a lady, I usually just have them sit in the back seat, because like I want it to go well, get her from point A to point B safely, and it's easier that way. Not really, but
that's awesome.
Hey, ladies, I'll get you from point A to point B. That's the point that I'm trying to make there.
That's awesome, Jimmy. I'll tell you a secret. When I go out on a date with a lady, I try to get them in the back seat too.
That's right.
All right.
But let's end on that note, right there.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. We're starting to ramble, so we're going to let go. And we'll see you next week. Be well. Take care of everybody. Episode 13 of Noel Casler podcast is complete. Thank you.